On this Native Report, we hear from Beth Drost as she recalls the life of her father. And we learn how the 1854 Treaty Authority helps track and maintain a healthy moose population. We also learn what we can do to lead healthier lives and hear from our elders.
Production for Native Report is made possible by grants from the Blandin Foundation, Anishinaabe Fund, and Alexandra Smith Fund, in support of Native American treaty rights, administered through the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation. The generous support from viewers like Jack and Sharon Kemp, DSGW Architects, personalizing architecture, online at dsgw.com. And viewers like you.
Welcome to Native Report, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Rita Karppinen. In this episode, we sit down with Beth Drost of Grand Portage, who tells us about her father's life and how his legal battles over hunting rights helped open up the entire 1854 ceded territory.
Curt Gagnon, who was he? Here's my dad. He's a man who loved Grand Portage and he loved the land before my father stood up for sovereignty and our treaty rights. We weren't allowed to hunt off the reservation, period. In 1854, there was a treaty signed and Grand Portage was a part of it, as was the Bois Forte Band and the Fond du Lac Band. We ceded a certain territory, which you can kind of see. It's northeastern Minnesota, near Duluth, and across to the middle of the state. And in the treaty, we were given the right to hunt and fish therein, and we were never allowed to practice those rights off the reservation. You know, you had to be careful of where you were, and you know, you had to have a license off the reservation, right? So I guess you could go off the reservation, but you had to pay for it. On the reservation, it was as it is, and you can hunt and fish here, gather here to live. I've heard the story a number of times, and it changes as stories do with him. So one particular time he was hunting, and it would have been kind of on the western edge of the reservation, near Reservation River, and kind of way up in the woods, and shot a moose, and it didn't drop. And so he tracked it and tracked it and tracked it and tracked it. And so, you know, some people would just let the moose go, right? The moose, shot it, you're never gonna see it again. You tried your best to get it. That's what every good hunter wants to do, is do what they can. And eventually they realized the moose had left the reservation, or he had shot the moose off the reservation, whatever triggered that law, that state law that says you can't hunt out of whatever season or without a tag or this. And so he turned himself into the game wardens and was cited. And he fought it. Basically, the Grand Portage Band fought it. They fought the state of Minnesota because, no, what did he do? He shot a moose, and it was in treaty area where he could, by treaty, shoot the moose, but by state law, federal law, state law, he couldn't. And so he was providing for his family. The moose went off the reservation. He tracked it, and he was cited. I was about 10 years old when the whole thing happened. And so growing up there, Dad was on the phone all the time. You know, he always had those legal pads that flip over. He always had those that he would be writing notes on and everything like that. And He never did get the moose, but he couldn't let it go, and he wanted to stand up, and he thinks he shouldn't have gotten in trouble, but knew that he had to get in trouble in order for something to change. And so being kind of that person who just kind of stands up and says, you know, this isn't right, bring it on. And they brought it on real hard, and it brought Grand Portage into the spotlight. And I can imagine that was pretty hard too, because it wasn't, you know, like we were used to the spotlight up here in our little town, and to be at the center of treaty battles in the 1980s, which were kind of fueled by the American Indian movement. There was no verdict. The state settled, or we settled, and my dad never wanted to settle. I gotta let everyone know that for sure. He didn't want to settle, and to like his grave, he talked about it. My parents had a gift store and a gas station that they were running for a while up in Grand Portage. And I remember all of a sudden we didn't have the store anymore. And we moved away for 3 months. That's as long as my dad could really stay away from here. But we moved away because there was a good opportunity, but really we moved away from a lot of strife and a lot of tension and uneasiness around the agreement that came out of the court case. And my family felt that they needed to get away for a little while. And so I think the tensions are really high. I think there were people who wanted it and there were people who didn't. And it was just people against each other from families and stuff like that. And so his point was, why would we give that stuff up at all? Why would we just give it up at all? The leaders at the time chose to settle for lots of different reasons, I'm sure. But what we get today from it is, in order to hunt that moose off the reservation, I have to put in an application. There's no fee. We give them our enrollment number and all our information, and we receive a tag in the mail, and we have an ID card, and then we can go moose hunting in our treaty territory. I think it's important to know that we're still doing this stuff. We're still out here practicing our treaty rights, even though we have to do it a little bit differently to follow the rules. It's worth it to be able to carry on the traditions and feed our families and share meat and share fish with our neighbors, just like we've always been doing. We're still doing it. We're still here.
Curt passed away in 2020 and will always be remembered for his help in furthering treaty rights.
Cortisol is a hormone made by your adrenal glands to help control inflammation. Corticosteroids are manufactured drugs that do the same thing. Corticosteroids are different than the steroids some athletes and weightlifters use. The corticosteroids doctors use for injections are often called steroid shots or cortisone shots. These are names for the same thing. Steroids ease inflammation and can calm down your immune system. They can really help many kinds of inflammatory conditions and can be given orally, by IV, as eye drops, ear drops, skin creams, inhaled, or as injections. The kind we're talking about today are steroid injections for joint and tendon pain. There are many conditions that lead to musculoskeletal pain, and steroid injections into knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, and other joints can bring enough pain relief for someone to do their daily activities. Steroid injections are helpful for certain kinds of back pain. Steroid injections don't work for everyone, but some people can get months of relief or even longer. Steroids are usually injected along with an anesthetic. The anesthetic wears off and the steroids can take a day or two to start working. The steroids stay in the injected area for a long time. Injected steroids can rarely have side effects, and those include allergic reactions, infection, skin color changes, and bleeding. Some people with diabetes can get higher blood sugars for days or weeks after a steroid injection. Overall, steroid injections can help someone put off a joint replacement or buy time for physical therapy to start working. Steroid injections are usually part of a treatment plan. As always, talk to your healthcare provider to help guide your decisions. And remember to call an elder. They've been waiting for your call. I'm Dr. Arnie Vainio, and this is Health Matters.
The Minnesota DNR's 2022 Moose Survey estimated a population of about 4,700 animals in Minnesota, most in the northern portion of the state. The moose is a sacred animal to Minnesota tribes and a key source for food for tribal families. The 1854 Treaty Authority and its member tribes play a key role in maintaining a healthy population of moose in the ceded territory.
Moose has been and still is a very cultural, important animal to the tribes. You know, when it comes to moose hunting for the tribes, it's not really a sport hunt, but it's a subsistence hunt. And back in 2010, we saw a dramatic decline in the moose population in northeastern Minnesota. And so that became of great concern to lots of people, but especially into tribal people who rely on that resource to feed their families. When the tribes signed the Treaty of 1854 with the United States government, they knew it was important they were living a hunting, fishing, gathering lifestyle. So they knew that it was important to be able to continue that, even though they were going to give up their lands and move to the reservations. And so Article 11 says those who preside in the territory ceded shall have the right to hunt and fish therein. And so they really laid the groundwork for the future.
The hunt is really important to our band members. When they harvest a moose, that is a lot of meat for a family and for a community. I've heard from band members that it's really important to them to be able to share that harvest with their friends and family and community, and we want to be able to sustain that practice for our band members as long as we can. I cover all of our wildlife related work, so that is our moose work, our wolf work. We do a bunch of other survey work, so we do a lot of annual surveys looking at fur bearer populations, loons, small mammals, waterfowl, all sorts of different stuff we're working on during the year. So it's really seasonal. Our work changes throughout the year, and then we kind of repeat when the next year comes around. So the survey is once a year in January. There's a set number of plots that we survey each year. So we've been surveying 52 plots every year. You can survey 4 or 5 plots on a good weather day. The plots cover what is considered primary moose range in Minnesota, and the primary moose range is all completely within the 1854 ceded territory. So we just kind of fly back and forth, and the observers sit on opposite sides of the helicopter and just kind of search out their side of the aircraft during the survey. And if you spot a moose, you just kind of shout it out, and the pilot will come around and circle that area to see if there are any more moose around that you didn't see the first time. And then we also need to record the age, if it's an adult or calf, and the sex of each moose. So that's why we circle. We spend a little more time so we can record that data. So the main point is to provide this annual estimate of the population size in this primary moose range. We also get some information on like bull to cow ratios and calf to cow ratios that can tell us a little bit about how the population is doing over time. But yeah, the main goal is to get that annual estimate of the population size. So the data from the survey are taken back to the statistician at the DNR, and he actually does all the math that creates the population estimate. And we We take that into consideration every year when we establish our hunt and what's going to happen. For the last 5 years, we've actually been under a special agreement with the state for a set number of moose each year, just 10 bull moose per band. Fond du Lac, which also hunts, has their own separate agreement with the state, and they do actually use like a sliding scale that's based on the population estimate. So if the estimate's like over 4,000, I think their quota is 30 moose or something.
So the survey is just kind of one tool. It doesn't give us a specific number, but it gives us an estimate of the moose population in northeastern Minnesota. We work together with the state of Minnesota and the Fond du Lac band because we all have a vested interest in what's going on with the moose population. Thankfully, to some degree, it has actually stabilized now for the last 11 years. And that's one of the things we're able to see out of the moose survey is just again, it's an estimate, but where is it at? Sort of a snapshot in time, and you want to look at trends over time. So our goals are to protect, preserve, and enhance the resources out there. It's to figure out a way to make sure that we can do our best and work with others to eliminate the threats and the problems out there.
So it's important, just generally from a management perspective, to know how many animals are out there in the population, to know that our harvest is sustainable for future generations. And it's also important for management purposes. So we try to manage moose in relation to deer and wolves, and it's important for us to know how the moose population is doing so that we can make smart management decisions. So moose are challenged currently in Minnesota for a number of reasons. They're at the southern edge of their range here. So moose are adapted to live in cold climates and in deep snow. And with climate change, we're seeing warmer winters and less snow. Maybe not this year, but in general, that's the trend over time. And that's allowing deer to move north into moose range further than they have before. And deer carry a number of parasites that can infect moose. And in most places where there are deer, there aren't many moose. But that's not the case in northeastern Minnesota. We have both, so that is a big concern for us, that if CWD starts infecting deer in the area, that they could spread that to moose, and it could be another challenge that moose face in addition to lots of other things. So the management actions that we do for moose are managing things like deer and wolves to reduce predation and spread of parasites, and then also managing habitat. They prefer young habitats where there's a lot of young vegetation to eat rather than like old growth forest type of things. So there's a Minnesota Moose Habitat Collaborative that we're involved in that tries to create these blocks of young forest interspersed with older forest that provides things like shade and wetlands and stuff like that. I feel really privileged to be able to work with the tribes in the area. I think it's been a really great experience. I didn't have much experience working with tribes before this, but it's been really eye-opening, and it's great to feel that we're kind of having a really important impact in that way.
Well, for me, working here as a band member and as a band who is signatory to the treaty, it's not just a job for us. It's actually you're connected a little bit more than that. You have a vested interest, and I kind of look at us that are working here presently right now as grabbing that baton and not only working for things in the present, but into things in the future, so that our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren can still harvest moose, can still go catch fish, can go gather walrus and things like that. So it does make it easier to come to work each day, and our jobs are still hard, but the cause is there, and so we take it very seriously, and that's why it's good to remind ourselves of the next generation and the next generation, because that's ultimately who we're working for also, is to make sure what we do carries on for generations to come. So.
The 1854 Authority and member tribes set annual moose bag limits through the annual moose survey and scientific research of current moose population trends.
It's just an everyday simple life. Get up in the morning, say your prayer, do what you gotta do. get back in the evening, say a prayer for thanks, and eat and go to bed. That's my life. I was fortunate to grow up in the old way and live in the modern way. So I'm trying to share that with them, to show them that, you know, even if they don't have a job, or they can always survive, whether it's hunting or fishing, whatever. My grandpa used to say, you gotta come back to your roots to understand what life is. So I didn't really understand what he meant till I left. And then when I left here, I would get out there and see that what they were doing didn't fit me. So I'd come back. Well, then I decided, well, I gotta find work, I gotta do this, so then I headed out again. And same thing. There was nothing out there, no matter what job I had, my mind and my heart was here. So I'd come back.
My name is Casey Keeler. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin. I'm an enrolled tribal citizen of the Tuolumne Band of Miwok and a direct descendant of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. And my first book, American Indians and the American Dream, will be coming out with the University of Minnesota Press this spring. So the book looks at the intersection of federal Indian policy and federal housing policy from a historical perspective, and it looks at 5 key temporal moments beginning in 1862 up to the early 2000s. So the story that I try to tell is that we can't look at American Indian people's contemporary access to home ownership without looking at the longer history, not only of federal housing policy, but of federal Indian policy. So by beginning in 1862 and looking specifically at Minnesota as a case study of sorts, we can see how American Indian dispossession and removal kind of flowed into some of the federal policies around housing that we see. So when that land became available for white settlement, is when we kind of see the growth of what I would consider federal housing policies, beginning with the Homestead Act. I see these as all connected. In fact, my conclusion looks at the crisis of homelessness that American Indian people face right now, and it's really visible in places like Minneapolis. So my argument is that we can't understand American Indian people's access to housings and home ownership or affordable rental housing without, again, thinking about this longer historical trajectory and what does it mean to move Native peoples away from their homelands and then not provide them with access to housing in their homelands as well. So I'm able to kind of trace this historical narrative of exclusion for American Indian people in the housing marketplace. So one of my favorite things to remind my students is that dispossession is a process. It's not something that just happened once when treaties were made in the 19th century. It's not something that happened once with the US to go to war. We are actively engaging in processes of dispossession every single day by not returning homelands and not acknowledging the homelands of Indigenous peoples. And I think about this for myself as well. And this is something my next kind of major research project turns to is, for me as a Native woman, my tribal communities are in Oklahoma and California. My tribe in Oklahoma was removed from the southern Great Lakes area to Oklahoma, so those aren't even our homelands. But what does it mean for me today to be a Native woman and own home and therefore property in southern Wisconsin, which is Ho-Chunk homelands? So that's something I begin to touch on in the first book, but I'm looking to think more in depth about for the next book. But what I want my readers to consider, particularly non-Native readers, is what does it mean to be a white homeowner in a suburb today, knowing that you have access to that suburb because of the histories of dispossession that began in the 19th century and continue to unfold to where we are today.
If you missed a show or want to catch up online, find us at nativereport.org and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for behind-the-scene updates. And drop a comment on social media if you enjoyed the show. Thanks for spending time with your friends and neighbors from across Indian country. I'm Rita Karppinen. We'll see you next time on Native Report.
Production for Native Report is made possible by grants from the Blandin Foundation, Anishinaabe Fund, and Alexandra Smith Fund, in support of Native American treaty rights, administered through the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation. The generous support from viewers like Jack and Sharon Kemp, DSGW Architects, personalizing architecture, online at dsgw.com. And viewers like you.